This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Pediatrician Nina Agrawal explains her fight to get Congress to start funding research on gun safety. Former Ambassador for Global Women's Issues, Melanne Verveer, describes them as the same as issues important to all human beings. And Bill Press talks with Congressman David Cicilline about gun safety legislation. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Nina Agrawal is a pediatrician who advocates a resumption of federal funding for research on preventing gun violence. She says it worked for car safety, fire safety, and bicycle safety. And we say hello to Nina Agrawal, pediatrician at Lincoln Medical Center in New York, coordinator of the gun violence prevention campaign of Doctors for America. Nina, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. Now, you're leading the fight. Unsuccessful so far, but to get Congress to drop a ban on federal research on gun violence prevention. Why was that put into place, and what are the chances of its repeal?
Right. The ban on federally funded research on gun violence was imposed 20 years ago in 1996. At that time, Congress approved language authored by Representative Dickey of Arkansas that prevented the Center for Disease Control, or the CDC, from using any funds that would be used to promote or advocate for gun control. At the same time, the CDC was defunded $2.6 million, which is the same amount of money that they were using to research gun violence. The ban was later extended to the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health. And as a result, there's been little progress to identify the root causes of gun violence and how we can prevent gun violence over the past 20 years. Since then, Representative Dickey has come out and made a public statement about his regrets about the ban and the need to resume federally funded research on gun violence. Doctors for America has been fighting to end the ban, and we've joined with 68 medical and public health organizations. We brought national attention to the gun research ban, and we were successful in creating dialogue in Congress about the ban. We were not successful in repealing it in 2015, as you said, but we're finding that the more people know about it, the more they're outraged about the ban and agree that it needs to end. We're optimistic. We plan to keep the pressure on elected officials this year, and we highly encourage people to call their elected officials and urge them to end the ban.
Well, and while unsuccessful on the ban, you're clearly making some headway in at least getting the word out there and making more people aware of what they may not realize is such a big problem.
Oh, you'll be surprised, the number of people who don't know about this ban, including within Congress. So I think it's been an issue that we can all rally behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then you've got the pro-gun members of Congress that say, amazingly, that the Centers for Disease Control has no business studying gun violence because guns are not a disease. How do you even begin to answer that?
Well, in addition to studying disease, the Center for Disease Control has long-standing success in studying injuries. They promote fire safety, motor vehicle safety, bicycle safety, and gun safety should fall within this. Both diseases and injuries are critical public health issues causing preventable death.
One of what I consider to be paranoid stands is that, well, they're going to come and take our guns away. And this is just about on whether it's the Doctors for America, the gun violence prevention campaign or something else, but they're going to come and take our guns away. Nobody came and took kids' bicycles away or anything like that. This is all just about finding a better way to deal with what is a significant problem, right?
That's exactly right. That's a really good comparison. Another one is motor vehicles. We've been able to make people safer in their cars. We didn't take cars away. We put in car seats, we put in seat belts, we put in airbags. We made them safer. And we need to do the same thing with guns.
Do you advocate parents asking other parents if there is a gun in their home before allowing a play date?
Yes, I do advocate as a pediatrician for parents asking if there's a gun in a neighbor's home, a family member's home, for a play date. It's just the same as if we ask if there's a pool and your child can't swim. We ask if somebody's serving nuts and your child's allergic to nuts. It's the same for guns. It's about making sure your child is safe. The American Academy of Pediatrics promotes the ASK program, which stands for Asking Saves Kids. And the ASK program encourages parents to ask if there's a gun where the child plays. I realize while it may not be an easy thing to do, it's the right thing to do to keep children safe.
Sure. We're speaking with Nina Agrawal, pediatrician at Lincoln Medical Center in New York and coordinator of the gun violence prevention campaign of Doctors for America. I think I know the answer to this question based on the last answer. Would you let your kids play with toy guns? And if not, what about, lightsabers or, just ordinary sticks as kids are wont to do?
Right. Speaking for myself, I would not let my kids play with toy guns. I think this perpetuates violence. Kids don't necessarily have the ability to distinguish between play and something that may be deadly. And too often we hear of children killing other children in the context of playing with a gun, in the context of a play date. So I don't advocate for toy guns. As far as sticks and other objects used in the context of fighting, I don't advocate for any toy that's used as a weapon to hurt someone. I think that, again, perpetuates a cycle of violence.
Mm-hmm. Now, turning to other issues that you deal with as a pediatrician, how are children doing in overall terms of health compared to, say, a generation ago, specifically regarding vaccines, lead poisoning, poverty, hunger?
As a pediatrician, I've seen significant progress in the health of children over my career. Through vaccines, we've seen a dramatic reduction in infectious diseases, polio, measles, mumps, rubella. The list goes on. For lead poisoning, we've learned the sources of exposure to lead. We've been successful in getting rid of lead-based paint, which is a major source of lead poisoning in children. For poverty and hunger, I think we've made progress, but I think we need to make more. We have significant problems with food insecurity in our country. Unfortunately, there's limited access for poor children to healthy food, which adversely affects children's health, learning, and behavior, and that can last into adulthood.
Which may possibly explain the obesity epidemic that we have in this country.
Oh, of course. Poverty, we see a lot of obesity amongst poor families.
Yeah. What effects has Obamacare had on children's health?
Right. Well, the Affordable Care Act has had a positive effect on children's health. Access to health care does improve child health. And the rate of uninsured children is now at a historic low of 6%. Because of the Affordable Care Act, more parents have enrolled in health insurance through Medicaid expansion. As a result, more parents found out their kids were eligible for Medicaid and SCHIP, the Child Health Insurance Program, and signed their kids up. But we need to keep working. We need to continue this progress, and I believe we need to achieve a day in which no child in the United States is uninsured.
Amen. Nina Agrawal, pediatrician at the Lincoln Medical Center in New York and coordinator of the gun violence prevention campaign of Doctors for America, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Doctor, thank you very much for your time with us today. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much.
You are quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Melanne Verveer was America's first ambassador for global women's issues, and she has some thoughts about how involving women in a nation's economy can help it grow. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
In a faraway land a long time ago, a civilization existed that was governed through a fairly rational political system. Even conservative candidates for high office had to have a good idea or two and be quasi-qualified. That land was the USA. It still exists as a place, but these days, Republican candidates don't even have to be sane, much less qualified, to run for the highest office in the land. All they need is the backing of one or more billionaires, a hot fear-button issue to exploit, and a talent for pandering without shame to the most fanatical clique of know-nothings in their party. Also, they must be able to wall themselves off from reality so that facts and truth cannot deter them. Indeed, the GOP's one great issue of the 2016 campaign is the wall. Ted Cruz practically snarls when he declares again and again that he'll build a wall that works. Marco Rubio is absolute about it. We must secure our physical border with a wall, absolutely. And Donald Trump has basically built his campaign atop his fantasy of such an imperial edifice. We're going to do a wall, he commands. There are, of course, certain problems that you might expect them to address, such as the exorbitant cost of the thing, the extensive environmental damage it'll do, and the futility of thinking that people aren't clever enough to get around, over, under, or through any wall. But don't hold your breath waiting for any common sense to intrude on their macho posturing. This is Jim Hightower saying, Trump even made a TV ad depicting hordes of marauding Mexicans invading our country, proof that a huge wall is necessary. Only the film footage he used is not of Mexican migrants, but of Moroccans fleeing into Spain. But after all, when trying to stir up fear of foreigners, what the hell does honesty have to do with it?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Women's issues are the same issues that all human beings want to see happen in their lives, says former Ambassador Melanne Verveer. And we say hello to Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. She served as the first U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues and is co-author with Kim Azzarelli of the book Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. Ambassador Verveer, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate your time. Starting out with a basic question, what are women's issues nowadays?
Well, I think when women's issues in many ways have been defined rightly as those issues that all human beings want to see in their lives. The fourth UN conference that took place on women in Beijing, China, some 20 years ago now, we just observed the 20th anniversary, echoed with those words from then First Lady Hillary Clinton, that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And in other words, all the rights that men enjoy around the world are rights that women should have as well as human beings. And at that conference, a platform for action was adopted by consensus by some 187 or so countries. And the platform for action is something against which many of us still measure our progress today. It was access to education, to health care, to be able to participate fully in the economies of our countries, to be able to participate in the politics of our countries, to enjoy legal rights, to be free from violence, and that is as true today as it was then. It has been part and parcel of women's right to be fully participatory, and that today extends from addressing issues of peace and security and being around negotiating tables and effective at those tables as much as it does having to do with issues like the environment and climate change and so many of the other pressing challenges that our world confronts. It is critical for women to play these roles, and they have a right to play them.
How much progress has been made in China and elsewhere, for that matter?
Well, as we embarked over the last period of time, knowing this anniversary was being absorbed, there's been a lot of work that's gone on to actually study the progress that's been made. And this is not something that we needed to wait 2 decades for. It's a constant process. But there's been a particular emphasis on it over the last several months. And what we find is that women have made considerable progress. The gaps in education, for example, primary education around the world have been pretty much closed, but the gaps in secondary are extraordinarily high. Gaps in a lot of the health measures have been closed. Women's economic participation is still at that midpoint. It's nowhere near where it needs to be. Similarly, women's political participation seems to be the hardest to achieve, where it has been and continues to be difficult for women to fully engage at any level of government and decision making. In our own country, for example, we have issues that go to the fact that equal pay for equal work is still elusive. Women earning less than 21 cents on every dollar, and imagine what that adds up to if you're a single breadwinner, what is not coming to you that should come to you so that you can take care of yourself and your family. And in the aggregate, what that represents, we still have small numbers of women comparatively on boards of directors of companies, in upper management. We confront tremendous challenges with respect to what we often refer to as balancing work and family, but the fact of women and men being able to be good employees and good parents. We're the only industrialized country in the world, for example, that doesn't have paid maternity leave or family leave. We also have a very checkered quilt that many people have to deal with in putting their child care arrangements together, and everybody wants the best for his or her child in terms of quality, accessible, and affordable child care. These are pressing social issues that still are reflected in our own society in many ways. And I think that we are living with systems that were put in place where there were very few women working outside the home. And today that's very, very different. I think more than half of women with a child under one are in the formal workforce. So we have to do better. So whether it's on the global level, where we still have tremendous disparities, and everywhere violence against women and girls is a scourge, something that has to be dealt with. We have plenty of challenges, but I don't want to underestimate the fact that there's also been a great deal of progress. And I think that one of the things that we clearly are interested in writing this book is demonstrating where we are today with so many women in positions of responsibility and power, and the potential that represents, armed with the kind of data and evidence that we have that makes the case that investments in women and their participation results in economic growth and social progress. We can't negate that any longer. We can't say that this is solely the right thing to do, as critically important and as that is. But to the skeptics out there, it is also the smart and strategic thing to do. So yes, there's been progress, but we have a way to go, and we are on this journey together. And Fast Forward is all about fast forwarding progress for women and girls in the United States and everywhere, and believing this is an optimistic book, because we believe if we take the confluence of factors, whether they be where we find ourselves in being able to make a difference, making that difference and connecting with others, we can truly get to a better place.
To what extent does the traditional raising of girls affect their power in the business world? You wrote about people-pleasing. So what is people-pleasing, and is there anything wrong with it?
Well, no, I don't think we should be engaging in selfish behaviors. But there is something about always relying excessively on outside validation for whatever we do. I think, we want to raise girls with confidence and self-esteem, to be able to listen to themselves in some ways, to understand the kind of difference they can make when they're guided by larger purpose, and certainly to give children the opportunities, girls especially, to know that they can succeed in whatever they choose to do. Issues, for example, like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, we have nowhere near the numbers of girls and people of color in that arena. This is a real challenge for our country, because if we're going to be technologically innovative and creative, if we're going to move our economy forward as we go through this 21st century and have the kind of skill sets we need, we have to invest in our people. And girls often drop out for whatever reasons, whether it be what they see in the media, for example, or what is viewed as cool, or wanting to please in some way. We've got to make greater efforts. And in the book, we go through some of those ways in which girls are being enabled to stay at these kinds of interest levels, and then go on to university and beyond. And it's interesting. We have more female graduates of colleges and graduate school today. They are the majority. And yet when it comes to this STEM field, there are only about 20% women in the field. So something happens in that period of the girl growing up and going forward, who may have manifested considerable interest in math and science, for example, but that is not being, it doesn't stay with her. It's not, she's not mentored. She doesn't see it as something that she wants to stick with. So there are numbers of issues like that, but it's not anything to do with selfish behaviors, and everything to do with being guided by a larger purpose.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, co-author with Kim Azzarelli of the book Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. You throw a little criticism at the media and suggest that women go on a media detox program. What do the media, if you can generalize, do to hold women back?
Well, I think that's probably a maybe a tad overinflated way to put it. But the truth of the matter is that the media has tremendous influence, no surprise there. Gina Davis, the actor, has an institute for gender in the media, and she has done extraordinary work looking at the way that women and girls are depicted, for example, in the media. And you rarely see roles. In fact, I remember when she came to see me when I was ambassador several years ago, and told me why she wanted to be engaged in this field, that even as a mother watching television with her children, she didn't see many roles that really depicted girls in ways that could resonate with them to go on and be everything that they could be. And I think one of the most telling points she has made is that in crowd scenes in the media, that women comprise about 17% of the population in those crowd scenes. 17% when women are 50% of the population. So maybe that in some ways is a metaphor for the larger problem that we see here. Gina often talks about the fact that in media you can make progress for women a lot faster in the roles that you put women in that are depicted in the media. And modeling is so important. Media is very impressionable. For example, many older girls and young women have been taken by watching sort of crime scenes being solved on TV. And today you've got a large number of women going into forensics because they grew up watching female heroines in this milieu, in this setting. And the CSI factor, I think, gives proof to the power of the media, if we had any doubt, of what it can do, both positive and negative, in its depiction of women in ways that really have broader consequences.
Okay. Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. The author, or co-author rather, with Kim Azzarelli of the book Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. Ambassador Verveer, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks with Congressman David Cicilline about gun safety legislation.
The president made his announcements on his executive actions on gun safety, also there, and also meeting with the president Monday afternoon at the White House to discuss the actions he would announce the next day. Our first guest, Congressman David Cicilline from the great state of Rhode Island, former mayor of the great city of Providence. Hey, Congressman, good to have you with us again.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it was a very emotional moment in the East Room yesterday, a very powerful moment for President Obama.
It was, the room was filled with not only advocates who have been working on the issue of gun violence for a very long time, but sadly, so many families who have been ravaged by gun violence and have lost children or siblings or other loved ones. And, the president got very emotional in the presentation because in part he was recalling the slaughter of 20 first graders at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. And it was a reminder that while we're fighting about important public policy, that the real purpose of all of this is to try to protect families from that kind of pain and that kind of harm that's being caused by gun violence. So it was a very emotional day, I think, for everyone. But I think everyone felt at least everyone in that room, very pleased that the president took the actions that he took.
And, you can understand the president's frustration. 13 mass shootings during his presidency, and yet Congress has failed to act, even though he's come, as you know, and you've carried some of this legislation, he's come forward with proposals, very common sense proposals. So what do you think the likelihood is now that Congress will come to its senses on this issue?
Well, I mean, it's, after we've had almost a mass shooting almost every day,
Yep.
More mass shootings than we have had days in the year. And you think about just last year, there were 13,000 Americans who lost their lives at the hands of a gun. this is an epidemic. This is a gun violence epidemic in this country. It's different than the experience of every other country in the world. So this is something we have got to address. But, I thought after Sandy Hook that we saw the lives of these young children taken away, and then prior to that we saw one of our colleagues, Gabby Giffords. We've had these incidents where you're sort of sure this will be the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it will move Congress to stand up and do what's right for the American people. And yet, for a couple of days, there's discussion and thoughts and prayers, which are obviously important, but it's, but no action. And so I understand the president's frustration. I'm just as frustrated. I've introduced a number of bills, as have my colleagues. We are not powerless to sort of do nothing about this. We have the ability to reduce gun violence and to make it more difficult for people who shouldn't get guns to get them. And these are very common sense proposals. And, I'm grateful the president is doing this. I hope it will spur us to action, to doing something. But I'm afraid that the unwillingness of my colleagues to stand up to the NRA and to the other powerful interests here is going to remain unchanged. The only way that I think it will change is people start demanding from their elected officials that they take action, and if they don't, hold them accountable and throw them out of office. And I think that's really our only prospect, is for people to see that the American people are demanding action on this. And it's a very, very. I worked on this since I was a mayor. I was one of the founding members of Mayors Against Illegal Guns with Mayor Menino and Mayor Bloomberg. This is something I worked on the state legislature. This is incredibly frustrating, and I know it's been very frustrating to the president. He did some good stuff and stuff that will really make a difference, but it does not absolve Congress of its responsibility to enact common sense gun safety legislation.
Well, let me ask you this, Congressman. Is you've been there, and you've run as a champion of common sense gun safety measures, as you say, way back to the time you were mayor. Is the NRA lobby really as powerful as some legislators fear?
Well, I think it's a really good question, because, when I hear that people blame the NRA, my answer is always the same. Is, look, this town, the town of Washington, is filled with very powerful special interests who lobby for their particular cause every day. And, that's nothing unusual, unfortunately. But the reality is we elect people to stand up to a whole host of special interests and to do what's right for the American people. So the responsibility for this is not the inaction does not fall on the shoulders of the NRA. The inaction on common sense gun safety legislation falls on the members of Congress who are unwilling to stand up and do this and to have the courage to do what's right for their constituents and for our country. And this notion of somehow we can't respond to special interests. This town is filled with people who lobby and filled with people who advocate. And it's the responsibility of people who are elected to stand up and decide and sift through right and wrong and what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. So I think you're right. We still should have the ability to do this, and I know many of us will continue to fight for this. But I think in a lot of ways, the money that the NRA spends and the way that they're organized has made people believe somehow that they have more power in this town than should. The American people ultimately have the power, and they want these common sense gun safety proposals enacted, and we have to be sure that their voices are heard and we act on what's in the best interest of the American people.
I think of Congressman John Yarmouth. I'm sure you know, a good friend of ours, a frequent guest on the show from Kentucky. And from the beginning, he's been, again, he's not anti-Second Amendment. He's just for common sense gun safety measures. And he's been elected and reelected from Kentucky with that stance.
Right. Well, that's the other thing. I think most responsible gun owners agree that guns should not get into the hands of criminals or people who have serious mental illness, such that having a gun is a danger to them, themselves, or other people. These are very common sense things, and I think most responsible gun owners, the vast majority, even most members of the NRA, agree with those. So these are not, none of what the president has proposed, none of the bills that I've proposed, interfere with the Second Amendment and people's right to have a firearm. That's in our Constitution. We recognize that. Everyone accepts that. But that doesn't mean you can't take steps to make sure guns don't get into the hands of people who don't belong having them.
If you had your druthers, let's say, if you could say, here's what Congress should do. What are the 2 or 3 most important steps on top of what the president's done that you would like to see Congress enact?
I think, Congress has to enact universal background checks, to be sure that every single gun sale to a purchaser, that purchaser undergoes a background check. And to be sure that it doesn't matter where it happens, gun shows, on the internet, in your home. If you're selling a gun, make sure the person you're selling it to is legally permitted to have a gun. So I think fixing our background check system, making sure that people are using it, making sure it contains, accurate data and that has lots of information. Second is to make sure that we do everything we can to prevent people who are seriously mentally ill from having access to a firearm and also have treatment. And the vast majority of people who have mental illness, of course, are not dangerous, don't even have a firearm. But in those instances where people have been engaged in mass shootings, very often there's been an issue of mental health. So making sure we have good ways to identify when that happens. And then third is to ban, to pass my bill, which is the assault weapons ban. These are weapons of war that were designed by the Germans for the battlefield. Their purpose is to discharge a great number of bullets at a very fast rate to kill the greatest number of people. We saw them used at San Bernardino and Colorado Springs and Sandy Hook and Aurora and Roseburg. These weapons don't belong in the neighborhoods of our communities. And we had an assault weapons ban. It was effective. There were some communities that reported as much as a 72% reduction in crime involving assault weapons. We should enact that and get these weapons off the streets.
Yeah, and look at the experience of and the successful experience with Australia, with Australia on that on that very measure. Now, Congressman, to indulge your patience while we've got you, there's one issue in Rhode Island. We've talked about this. My wife, Carol's from Providence, and so I spent a lot of time in Rhode Island, interested in local politics up there. And last year, legislation was introduced to make Rhode Island the first state by legislature to legalize a recreational use of marijuana. Where is that, and do you support it?
That legislation has not been enacted. My guess is the General Assembly went into session yesterday. My expectation is that legislation that will legalize marijuana will be reintroduced. Mm-hmm. But the legislature did decriminalize marijuana, so it did take some action in the last session to reduce the penalties. But I think there will be a real debate in Rhode Island about legalizing marijuana. My view has been pretty simple. I don't have any issue with adults using marijuana, and I think we really should look at the experiences in Colorado and Washington State, because I think people have made the argument by decriminalizing it, you make it less likely for young people to use this drug because the black market closes down and there are legal ways to do it. And there are other people who argue it's like alcohol, that if you make it legal, it makes it kind of less nefarious and more young people will experiment. I think we should look at those two states and kind of learn lessons. But I think, adults certainly have the freedom to use whatever substance they want, whatever, marijuana. So, I'm inclined to support it, but I do think we have to be very aware of the dangers of, marijuana on very young developing minds and being sure that we're not making it easier. But other than that, I don't have
And I'm sure the people will be looking at the economic benefits that Colorado and Washington have gained as well.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Nina Agrawal, Melanne Verveer, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.